Ergonomics is about fitting the task to the human and not the other way around. How do you do that on the assembly lines of tomorrow? Or even today? And what's the business case for focusing on ergonomics? This is Momentum Talks, a show about smart factories. Welcome Maciej Zdrodowski, ergonomics architect at Volvo Cars, Frida Graf from Atlas Copco, and with us on link, Cecilia from Chalmers University in Gothenburg.
Thank you.
You work closely with customers. How present is the topic of ergonomics with them?
I think it's become, the last couple of years, it's become a more and more important topic for customers as well. And I notice in the details on the questions that we get that the knowledge level has also increased a lot.
Modern manufacturing solves many problems, but what new ergonomic challenges are we seeing with this, Cecilia?
Well, production systems and manufacturing is kind of like an ever-evolving thing. So we're always trying to update it and make it more modern, introducing new technology. And very often that changes our idea of what is good enough performance, what is excellent performance. And of course, there's always the drive to be competitive. So when we introduce new technologies to the operators, then it's always the question of how well will it go for them to interact with the new technology? Do they understand what to do? Is it easier for them to do the job correctly? Is it motivating in a new way? Is it more personalized? But the ergonomics challenge is not only a physical thing, because ergonomics is a systems discipline. It's about the interplay of everything working out together for goals to be fulfilled while the humans still have well-being. So I think that from that perspective, there's always new challenges coming for ergonomics, regardless of whether it's cognitive or if it's physical in terms of loading the body.
So if that's some of the problems that we're seeing with new technologies, then what new technologies do we have that helps us in ergonomics, Maciej?
We are using mainly to collect the data. Data are the gold and the new gold for our industry, in all the industries. So collecting the data in ergonomics is crucial to be predictive, to assess, to simulate. We can use new tools, new small robots, we call them Cobots, that they could have collaborative mode. They could coexist and collaborate hand in hand with humans nowadays. We have a lot of smart devices that could track posture, could give feedback to the operator. And other things, we see that wearable devices are implemented to help people work with awkward postures.
What would be an example of this type of wearables?
Well, that could be devices for tracking posture, for measuring physiological parameters, heart rate, temperature, exoskeletons to help people carrying demanding tasks, smart watches, cameras, drones, a lot of them, and all to speed up, to make production smoother, faster, more reliable.
So we're able to get all of this data, but Cecilia, what can we actually use it for?
So I want to make a distinction here. I'm going to be the academic, sorry. But we don't act on data. We act on information, because information has been interpreted, even if it's just sorting the data into good or bad. And essentially, that is what allows us to make better decisions. So if I'm getting lots of feedback from my smart t-shirt while I'm working that, oh, I'm getting a buzz now, that means that my posture is not good, then I have to know what to do about that for the situation to be better again. So collecting data, that's a good start, but transferring that data into something that the receiver can interpret as, oh, this is a signal for me to do something. And that understanding of the data and what story it tells, I think we need to either make better interfaces, or we need to train people in understanding what the value of that data information actually is, so that it can steer us toward better behaviors.
Have you seen any good examples of this recently?
Well, I've seen a good start, and that was actually a smart t-shirt. So KTH has been running a project that has to do with smart clothing and essentially attaching some sort of electrodes inside a t-shirt that shows you where your arm where your arms are at any given time. And essentially, there are some basic ergonomic rules saying that if you work above shoulder height, that's generally not good or healthy posture, no matter what it is you're doing. So it will warn you if you get to that level. The problem is that it also alerts you if you're leaning on something, which means you're not actually engaging your muscles, but you're still getting a warning. So from that perspective, that data has not been turned into information. It's just like, now you're up there again. And that might get annoying. And people who get annoyed, they find workarounds. So we have to watch out so the helpful technology we develop doesn't turn into something that we choose to ignore and work our way around, because then it's not a good investment to start with. So we need to think about the user interface for sure.
Frida, what do you do with all of this data?
Yes, it's a lot of data these days, and we work a lot with how this data should be presented and at what time. So different layers of data presentation for the users. So depending on who is in need of the data, we need to present it at the right time and for the right person.
Speaking about cobots, to what extent do they actually solve ergonomic issues, Maciej?
We see a lot of benefits. We assume that 70% of manufacturing tasks are 3D, either dirty or dangerous. So mainly cobots could take over physically demanding tasks, repetitive tasks, heavy loading tasks that could give relief for the operators and reduce strain and workload. That's the huge benefit when we can improve ergonomics and safety.
I think that there's a big window of opportunity for cobots to be a really big help. I mean, I've always imagined, the true kind of cobot I would picture as ideal would be one that gives me 8 arms, basically, so that I don't have to overload my own shoulders and my own, biological machine as much as letting the arms do the heavy lifting, do the difficult turning, maybe even allowing me to have more eyes than just my own. So I think that we need to see robotics as ideally a way for us to extend the individual human's capacity to do difficult things. Now, with that said, if the operator doesn't understand why or how to do it, then, the whole thing could stand and fall with whether the interaction is successful or not. So for it to truly help, for it to truly offload the body, I think the human who is collaborating with the cobot also needs to understand, what is it that this thing does that helps me? What is it that makes this more efficient?
Another important factor here is a changing demographic. How does that play into ergonomics, Cecilia?
Well, what we understand from most European countries is that we have aging populations, that quite a few of the people who are in the workforce currently are in their 50s and upwards, while the generations that have followed them are fewer in number. If we want to make sure that we don't very suddenly lose a huge chunk of our routine and our knowledge that is kind of ingrained in the personnel, then how do we make it possible for them to want to stay longer and be able to work to a high degree of productivity and efficiency? And just being productive and efficient might not be enough to keep people, but if they feel that they can be appreciated and use their skills and maybe even allow some of that skill set to be transferred to the next generation, then I think we have a more viable model, so we don't get a sudden, brain drain from all of our industries. There's always a driver to automate and remove the 3Ds that Maciej was talking about, but I think we have to think about, how do we create a multi-generational workplace where it doesn't matter what age you are, it should be possible to do the job and to do it well.
And so how do you adapt to this within product development, Frida?
Yes, it can be small changes, like, for example, maybe for having more women in the factories. That means that you need to have lighter tools with also less forces applied on the operators. And also that also applies for an older work population. We work with that by lowering the weight of our products and also working with things like increasing contrast on interfaces and also font sizes and things like that. And simple things like having a light at the front of the tool, because with increasing age, you also lose the light sensitivity. So to see what you're actually working on, it could be helpful with having an extra light there.
So how do you actually create a business case around ergonomics? Maciej, you start.
It's important to think about as an investment, not a cost, because you invest in something. You invest in people, you invest in technology, you invest to have profit, to have more safe and more sustainable working condition. So if you invest in all elements of the equation, then you could benefit in different areas. You could have much more involved workers. You could have much better quality. You can decrease sick leaves, work-related injuries and risk. It's a lot of benefits that we can see, but all of them are investments, not a cost.
I agree a lot with what Maciej is saying, but also that I think most companies are going to want to keep developing and introducing new and better tools and equipment. And I wouldn't call it a cost if that's going to happen anyway. And it's never, ever a good business case to waste your staff. So I think that one key is to tie in ergonomics with what it actually improves, which is productivity and efficiency. When you can use ergonomics to make the job easier in a cognitive way to do correctly, and that you know for a fact, yes, now I did it correctly, then that job is done. I don't have to keep dwelling on it and wondering, oh, did that thing actually snap into place? And another aspect is I actually have a lot of students at Chalmers who do work in production as a side gig apart from their studies, and they are very aware of how much the body is at risk for strain and fatigue as part of that work. So they have their eyes on this. So I'd say the business case goes beyond immediate, profit. It goes into like a view of the company in the long run.
And I also want to add that maybe not always ergonomics has to cost anything extra. I mean, many times you already have the equipment in place. It's just about adjusting it for the specific situation. Maybe you have rebalanced the line or something happened, and then you also need to look over your ergonomic equipment and see if you can adjust it in any way to improve the ergonomics. And that wouldn't cost anything.
I would assume you need very close collaboration with operators and input. So how do you work with operator input today, Frida?
It's very important for us to come into the real life setting and see how our products are being used in reality, not just how we imagine how it would be sitting here at the office. So we go to customers very regularly and see how they are working and the environment, the noise level, the lighting, everything. Once I went to a customer and we noticed that to reach some of the joints, they had to reach through a small hole with both arm and tool. And we were not allowed to try it ourselves on the line, of course, but we brought that knowledge back to the office. And we used a very simple cardboard box and we made the same size hole on that. And then we tried it with our own prototype. And then we realized that we couldn't fit the tool with the battery pack going through the hole. So we had to actually develop a smaller battery to fit that application. So that is the kind of learnings that you can do from a simple customer visit and seeing the tool in reality.
And it doesn't seem to have required very expensive materials from your side either.
Exactly. So it's not a big investment. It's just about using your fantasy and what you have at hand.
And of course, always keeping humans first of mind, right, Maciej?
Exactly, human-centric design. When we designed the processes, we follow the rules that the smallest can reach and the tallest can fit, and they all can read instruction properly, because that's the core of ergonomics. Fit the task to the human, not the human to the task.
And on that note, I would like to thank you all very much for being here today. It's been very enlightening for me, at least, regarding ergonomics and the smart factories of the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Here are some things to keep in mind. Make sure you fit the task to the human, not the other way around. Use new technologies to monitor ergonomics. And ignoring ergonomics can be costly and diminish quality. And finally, if you hate it, automate it. Thanks for watching our show about smart factories.